session. Take a moment and gather what you need. Feel free to grab a notebook, a journal, something to drink, and let's go ahead and dive in together. So, welcome. I am Leanne Mallory. I'm the founder and CEO of Guts and Grace Leadership, where we help women leaders, especially women and diverse leaders, tap into the wisdom of their bodies and intuitions so that they can become more recognized and resilient industry leaders. Our clients are working on projects and initiatives that are game changing in their industries. And I would say, in many ways, I am a steward of new paradigm leadership and success. And in this session, I want to talk to you a little bit more on the topic of integrity. This is a topic that many of our clients are interested in. And I would say I've been on my own deeper dive around this subject lately. It's kind of an old, tried and true leadership topic and conversation, but I want to give a bit of perhaps a new spin on it and help you see how it ties deeply to the work of embodied leadership that we do here at Guts and Grace. We will cover in this session what are the three types of integrity and how can we embody them as leaders, and also where and when and how do we tend to miss the mark. And near the end of our time together, I'll invite you to do a bit of reflecting for yourself on how you may resonate with this topic of integrity, where you're doing well, and what might be an upgrade that's on the horizon or a needed upgrade for you. So, first of all, as we begin, what is integrity? For many of us, this value of integrity sits fairly high on the list of values that we would like to espouse in our leadership. I would say, especially in the emerging and existing conscious business community, we tend to pride ourselves in being an upstanding community of organizational leaders that are standing for truth, that have the values, alignment with our own values, that are working on things like social and environmental justice, and that we're really people who walk our talk. So this question of like, do I have integrity? It's almost like we shouldn't ask the question, right? That in some way, of course, we have integrity. It is what we stand for. It is who we are being in the world. It's what we do in the world. And I think in many ways, none of us would want to be accused as having a lack of integrity. And there are a lot of ways, perhaps if we go a little bit slower, if we look a little bit deeper, if we look underneath the surface, this is something that is a lifelong practice: building, cultivating, expressing, walking the talk of integrity. And so perhaps in a way, the work is never done. So if we look at the actual definition, or one of the definitions of integrity, we see that integrity is defined as the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles and a certain level of uprightness. This is not the only definition, but it's certainly one that shows up very quickly when you actually look for the definition. And if you hear in there the morality that is associated with, or the connotation of morality that's associated with integrity, it kind of gives us a sense that we better have it. You better have integrity. If you don't, well, who's going to want to play with you, right? Literally, nobody wants to be accused, with a few rare exceptions perhaps, of lacking integrity, having strong moral principles, being upright, being a good citizen, these kinds of things. There's another definition, though, of integrity that I think gives us a bit more spaciousness to be able to ask the question, well, do I really embody this? Do I embody this fully? And another definition of integrity, maybe even more basic, not so much human, but more basic material definition of integrity, is the state of being whole and undivided. Integrity as the state of being whole and undivided. What does that mean? That all of my parts are actually connected to each other, that I am not different than myself, perhaps. So there's more to the story than just being moral. And I think this is where mischief can happen in our leadership, especially, let's say, if we're committed to standing for the first definition of integrity. If I really need to, want to, my values are such that I appear, that I am known as being moral, being upright, it could actually be that that creates a bit of mischief in terms of fully playing out the wholeness, the undividedness, the not being at odds with myself, the being fully true to myself and fully connected, that integrity can also mean. So many of you who know me know that I started my career about 10 years at a boutique leadership firm where the work we were doing was a full year trajectory of 360 feedback, leadership development, seminars and sessions, about 25 days of training over the course of a year, working specifically with senior executives and teams. And a lot of that work was focused on the extent to which they were truly walking their talk and being in the ways that their values would say that they'd like to be with their team members. Were they coming across as coherent, integrous leaders who were doing the things that they said that they would do? In the context of doing that work, as well as in deeply coaching women leaders over the last about 15 years inside of Guts and Grace, I have found that there are at least three different kinds of integrity that are important to embody, that really lead to us being fully seen and assessed as integrous leaders. And that also can tend to get lost when we're operating under pressure in our lives and or at work. So here are the three types of integrity that I work with at Guts and Grace. The first one we might say is like, my word is my bond, or in other words, I do what I say I'm going to do. Quite simply, if this is what I have said, do I actually do the thing? That sounds easy, but if you think about your life, all the different things on your plate, all the different things that are scheduled on your calendar, it's not really as easy as it sounds, right? I might say that I'm going to do something and then, overcome by events, as we say in the corporate sector, in the government sector. I might make a commitment and then I realize that actually I've double booked something, or there's a way that I have to resolve that commitment in a different way because, in fact, it's not possible anymore. So just simply being able to say I'm going to do something and then do the thing that I said, and being in a practice and a habit of that over time is a huge part of how we're read as integrous, and it is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Now, it's also possible to have integrity and renegotiate. So part of my word is my bond, or I'm keeping my word, is also that if I do need to make a change, I do so. I have a renegotiation conversation, or I do that in a way that takes care of the dignities of myself and the other stakeholders involved. So these are aspects of this part of integrity. What I tend to find when I work with leaders more deeply, and what I mean by that is most of us will say, pretty much, I do what I say I'm going to do. But if you start to kind of pull the layers back, or you start to kind of look behind the curtain a little bit, if we really get honest with ourselves, that there are often ways we're not fully embodied in this, even if we have the best of intentions. So one, as I already mentioned, could be time that I tend to double book myself, or I tend to find myself in too many commitments, and therefore they just can't all happen. And perhaps I don't have the strongest practice of renegotiation or changing timelines. Maybe I'm embarrassed to do that. I'm a little conflict avoidant. I don't want to have that conversation that says, hey, I can't really fulfill on the thing. So I sort of pretend and hope that it doesn't get noticed. But over time, perhaps it does get noticed, and that starts to add up to a reputation of not having this kind of integrity. The other thing that I see at play a lot, though, is a little bit different, and it's a bit more like, in some domains, I do this really well. And so, in a way, because I'm so good at it in this domain, I let myself off the hook for it over here. What that could mean, for example, is that at work, I'm always keeping my word, but then to keep my word at work, I'm on the flip side, letting things drop in certain ways at home. And in some way, it's like, well, it's not quote unquote as important of a domain. I might not really believe that, but some part of my brain might be playing that game. So it can lead to a context where certain domains are less uplifted in our psyches in terms of where integrity needs to happen, especially if we're trying too hard or extra hard to perform in terms of keeping our word in other contexts. It starts to lead to a set of trade-offs that may eventually take a toll on our reputation at home or at work. So you can kind of check in with yourself. In what ways am I good at this? In what ways, or in what domains, for example, in what context perhaps, am I making trade-offs to be able to hold myself as upstanding on one side, but perhaps letting things go on the other side? I'll give you an example that I've seen a couple of times. I have a number of clients who are working on fundraising for their organizations right now. And of course, it's a really big game to go and raise money for your organization, whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or whether you're working for or running a larger nonprofit or another kind of organization. One thing that I see commonly actually is that an entrepreneur or a CEO and executive will be in this process of fundraising, but perhaps on the side, in personal relationships in smaller contexts, owe somebody money, or not pay something back, or not finish closing the loop on a payment that was owed, for example, to a vendor, or money that was owed to a friend. This kind of let's say, lack of integrity, to use the expression, can create an energetic mismatch between what's trying to get accomplished with the fundraising, for example, and what happens in terms of the other domains where that word isn't being kept. So this is just one example, but I encourage you to think about the different domains that you operate inside of, and if you see yourself as someone with high integrity in one way, are there other places that may get sacrificed and or ignored to be keeping your word in this domain? That doesn't give you the answer yet of what to do with it, and we'll have some time to think about that at the end, but I just want to give you some examples or places to look. Why are we doing this? Because again, in a way, integrity, moving toward greater integrity, is a lifelong path. Walking the Path of Integrity, as the title of this session. And the more we're willing to look without judgment, if possible without embarrassment, without shame, or maybe going through the embarrassment or the shame, the more we're actually able to get closer to the ideal and the ethic that we hold for ourselves. But we actually have to look under the covers. We have to look behind the scenes to see what is so there. So hopefully this gives you a place to look. The second kind of integrity, let's call it being true to myself. This is a place that I tend to work quite a lot, especially with women in leadership, and especially, let's say, at the mid to senior levels of leadership. Certainly can happen at any moment in one's career. We can be interested in this at any moment in one's career. But what I tend to find when I work with women in leadership is that to some extent, along the way of building a career, especially if we're in the corporate or the government sector, or we're working inside of movements where they seem to ask a certain thing of us to be successful or to be the right kind of leader, that to some extent, we may start to make trade-offs where we're leaving certain parts of ourselves behind. Maybe that is a safety strategy. I don't feel that I can be this and be safe inside of this context. Maybe it's a belonging strategy. I actually need to be this other way, it seems, to be able to be accepted, to belong. Maybe it's just a way of maintaining my own dignity. But nonetheless, I'm starting to separate from or pull from the beingness that I actually am. We could say, again, being true to myself would be like the really mundane or mainstream way to talk about this. The first aspect of integrity around keeping my word is between you and another person. But really, this aspect, the second, is much more about being between you and yourself, having integrity in that domain. So, a question you might ask yourself is, are you telling the truth about who you are really in your workplace, in your community, in your marriage, for example, in a variety of contexts? And in that, are you being aligned with, are you being in integrity with your real self in that way? There's a lot of territory here. There are a lot of reasons why we may not choose to do that. And nonetheless, what I found is that even in workplace contexts where my clients see that it doesn't seem like I'll fit, or it seems like it could be unsafe, or it seems like fill in the blank, if I am true to myself in these ways, at some point the rub between who I'm acting as if I am and who I really am starts to get too hard. And either I start to burn out, either I start to feel depressed, or I start to feel kind of misaligned from a meaning perspective in terms of that, or I'm just getting asked to do more and more stuff that isn't actually really for me. And through all of that, I find that I'm not able to keep performing to the standard because it's so far off from who I really am. So, this kind of integrity is really one of the core focuses of what I work on at Guts and Grace, because again and again, I find, especially if I'm working with women leaders at that mid to senior level or even executive level, that if we're looking for executive presence, if we're looking to really make an impact, the truth is finding the most authentic and integrous self expression, being most fully aligned with yourself, is actually where your superpowers start to come online and get recognized. And the match between you and what you have to offer, you and what the market needs, you and what your organization needs, it becomes much more crystal clear. And you're able to be, in all the best ways, leveraged for your real strengths and your real gifts that you can bring to the party. So we take a look at this as kind of the undercurrent of a lot of what we do at Guts and Grace Leadership. And a lot of what we also do is work with the fears, the considerations, why I wouldn't want to do this, why this being true to myself can be a sticky thing to be taking on as a woman or a diverse leader in the workplace. What I find is that when we start to separate from ourselves in this way, when I'm not being true to myself, we start to again, deplete, we start to have less access to what's really true for us. And it can also then become more difficult to recognize when I'm out of integrity with myself. It can become more difficult to recognize the way I might also be out of integrity with others. So it can start to become a reputational cost. It also becomes more difficult to get our real needs met, which then tends to lead to things like burnout or things like a struggle in terms of really having the resources that I need to be able to succeed in my role. So this is super important. I'll give you one example, although I can probably share many. I know a lot of folks are on the job market right now, or between jobs, or post layoff, or looking for a role. There are a number of folks that I've coached over the last couple of years where being out of integrity with myself has slowed down their process of really landing the next right role for them. Now, it's interesting. In some ways, performing to the test of a job interview can, at least at first glance, in some markets, at some times, make it easier to get a job. Will you want to stay in that job? Will you be happy in that job? Big question mark. But I'm really seeing, even in this market right now, that the more we're trying to be something that we're not because we think it's what they're going to want to hire, it's not really working as well as it used to, if it ever really worked. Certainly, it's not getting us to a job faster. It's taking a long time anyhow. So, in this market, my experience in coaching folks is that you might as well actually start to really ask yourself the question: what is the right level? What is the right role for me? Who am I really? And start to pitch that in your job interviews. A, you're going to be happier on the back end when you land the job, but B, it's not necessarily going to take longer. It might actually expedite your process to really get into the thing that's a good fit for you. So there are a couple people that I'm coaching right now, and one of them, for example, came to me with a lot of different things on her resume. And when we really looked underneath it, what we got to see was that actually, in some way, she had the superpower of being a steward of innovation in a number of different kinds of roles over the course of her career. And if you look at actually what she's done, she's great at managing bigger teams, moving people forward toward a vision. Ultimately, my assessment was the next role for her would make sense to be a C-level role, stewarding some kind of major change in an organization that actually needs that type of leader. What she was doing was pitching for a few different types of roles that were a few layers or maybe just one layer below that, and not quite feeling a match between her and the role. So the possibility, if we're looking at this kind of integrity, is to actually level up with and line up with what your real gifts are, what your real superpowers are, what your real skill set is, what you really love, and what you're really designed to do, and to start orienting both your resume and what you're saying in interviews and your informal conversations to actually match that. So this would be part of the conversation under the being true to myself aspect of integrity. The third type of integrity I want to talk about is a little bit more subtle. And what I would call this is coherency in all parts of me, or we might say coherency in body, mind, and spirit integrity. This gets closest to the second definition that I read earlier. The idea that being whole, having all of the parts actually connected, aligned, working together in right relationship and in resonance, that that this is a lifelong path, I might say, and something that as an embodied leadership specialist, I'm deeply interested in. Sometimes we may see, for example, that someone just seems out of sorts with themselves in some way. It's sometimes hard to put your finger on or hard to read. It's especially sometimes hard to read with ourselves. But it might be like they seem really happy, like they seem not happy, they seem really expressed and really on purpose and doing great work, but something in them just feels really sad. Or, for example, I'm a person who often says, I'd like to do that. I want to do that. I'm putting my hand up for that. I'm putting my hand up for that. But their energy actually feels super depleted, for example. So a mismatch between maybe actions and energy, or embodiment of a certain kind, and then what I'm saying, for example. And we can start to see that when a leader has these mismatches happening inside, a few things can happen. One, they may feel off. So if this is you, it's like, I might just feel off. I can't really, it doesn't make sense. Like on paper, this is going well. I'm good at this, but I hate it. Or somehow my energy is here, but what I'm doing is over here. But also, it can break down, it can start to break down trust when someone is reading those different aspects of like fragmentation in who you're being, how you're coming across, what's showing in your presence, for example. You may think about, for example, someone who, it's funny, I have someone in particular I'm thinking of actually where their soul, actually, their spirit, their heart, they seem quite light, but the way they move through the world and they take action in their body, in fact, is quite rigid. And it's not a problem necessarily. We can go about life this way, but it doesn't feel whole, right? It doesn't feel aligned. It doesn't feel integrous. It doesn't feel connected. And they might have less access to energy or feel less alive in that mismatch. Why does this happen? Often we fragment in some way our own identity between parts of ourselves to cope with traumas, past or present day situations that are challenging. In some way, we may fragment because it serves a function. It serves a function to support us to get by in some way or to cope with something in some way. So you may recognize this description in yourself, and you might also be able to go, oh, because X happened and I haven't fully healed, or X happened and I haven't fully contended with or integrated that experience in some way. So some part of me is kind of here and some part of me is over there. It serves a function. It serves a function to protect us. It can serve a function to kind of keep us going or help us cope. It also takes energy and takes a toll on our nervous system to maintain, because the easiest way for our nervous systems to be is fully coherent, aligned, and integrous. It takes the least energy to do that ultimately. So there are contractions, there are holding patterns, there are extra efforting that happen in the body and also in the mind and psyche to keep uh, fragmentation in place. Okay, so what does this look like, for example? It can look like many things. I want to give you, I think in this case, I want to give you a bit of a positive example because some of you may also relate to this who are watching. There are, again, a couple different people that I'm working with on translating their work into value. So let's say becoming a consultant for the first time, have a lot of industry expertise and knowledge, and yet maybe I've never asked for anyone to pay me for my work directly because I've always had a day job, for example, right? You can see yourself in this or imagine another scenario that's a little bit more like you. So there's a pitching for something that's a bigger, a bigger piece of work or a bigger paycheck, for example. And then at the same time, this older kind of mindset or thought or sense, like, do I really deserve that? Can I really wield that? Will people actually pay that? What's challenging, right, in this fragmentation is that at the level of expression, the value that the person would provide, because they've already embodied this level of value, they've already embodied this level of expertise or mastery. So it's like I'm resonating here in terms of what I can give, but my relationship with money, for example, has me a lot younger, a lot smaller, or some part of my mind on a bit of a different planet than where my actual expression and giving could happen. So again, a mismatch. Um, what's most coherent, most integrous, is to bring those two things into alignment. It might take some time to do that, but when we're able to actually do that, we start to have the possibility of the thing we're asking for and the value that we're actually offering being resonant and becoming more of a match. Okay, many more examples that could be like that. So I actually want to invite you to take a moment to consider for yourself. Perhaps there's something that you relate to. Maybe you're like, well, check, I'm good at all of those things. I'm fully in my integrity in all three of these different areas. Again, the areas being keeping my word with others, being true to myself in a whole way, and then also the coherency in my own parts, body, mind, spirit, emotions, etc. But perhaps you came to this session or you're watching this session later because you feel there's some room to grow for you. And if that is the case, first of all, I want you to know that it has been a pretty strong recalibration year or years, maybe 2020, 2023, 2024, For a lot of people that I work with, it's almost like whether it's what's happening astrologically or environmentally or politically, it's almost like we're being asked to upgrade. And so if you find that things have felt a little off or there is some upgrade or next level of integrity being asked of you, you are not alone. So I invite you to take a moment and just check in with yourself. Like, what if this resonates? And is there a way that I feel there's an upgrade for me? You don't have to get into the details, but maybe take a deep breath, feel your body, get in present time. You've heard a lot of information. And if it makes sense to you, ask your body, what's true for me here, or what's needed for me here? Maybe you'll ask the question now and you get an answer right away, or maybe you ask the question now and no answer comes, but later you're on a walk or you're in the shower and it's like, boom, this is what's for me. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of questions. If you would like, you're welcome to journal on these questions now or later. The first question is, when it comes to integrity, what are you already really good at? Or what are you doing well right now? When it comes to integrity in general, or one of these three definitions, what are you already really good at? Or what are you doing well right now? Given the live and given our timing, I'm going to ask the next question. You can always come back to it, or even just write, a couple of words. The second question is, in what ways may you have strayed from or fallen out of integrity with others or yourself, or between the parts of you? In what ways may you have fallen out of integrity with others or yourself, or between the parts of you? Again, a couple of words, a bullet point, half a sentence that you want to come back to later is fine. But ask the question. The third question is, what's hard to admit or to face about that? Maybe you have a reputation to uphold. Maybe you never look in that place, and so you're ashamed at not having really paid attention to it before. Maybe you're not sure how to solve it, and that makes it hard to admit. What's hard to admit or to face about that, if anything? And then the last question is, what's one action you could take in the direction of repair with yourself or with someone else? What's one action you could take in the direction of repair with yourself or with someone else? The question's kind of like, what's the next step? If you've thought about this, if you've taken a look, if you've been in this reflection, what's the next step? It might be as simple as a little more journaling. It could be there's a conversation to have, something to admit. For those who are here live or may watch later, I went ahead and put some of the questions in the chat in case you want to see them in writing or come back to them. So to close us up here, I want to say that it's important and useful for the sake of integrity to choose the next step. Perhaps you decide on a practice. Maybe you're like, I'm willing to journal on this or reflect on this a little bit more or turn my attention to it in a different way. It might be, again, a step between you and others, or it could simply be a step that you take with yourself. What step you choose may depend upon the nature of the misalignment or the out of integrityness that you're finding. It could be an apology. It could be a change of a company or team protocol. Maybe you redesign an alliance with a person or a place or an organization. Maybe you're just taking a couple days off with your journal and a glass of wine or a green juice or a cup of cacao to reflect on your recent trajectory and to get to know yourself again, to really be in like, okay, I'm not sure it's something, but here's some time to be with it. It could actually look like buckling down and doing some of the hard work you've been avoiding, closing some loops, finishing some things, keeping your word in some way that you know is an open loop for you. So I invite you to do this. I invite you to take some action if you stuck around for this session. It's really only through action that things start to change. And that is very much what we're about here at Guts and Grace Leadership. We are also very much about helping our clients identify misalignment and recalibrate toward personal and professional integrity. It's one of the core focuses of what we do in the Guts and Grace method and what we focus on in the Guts and Grace coaching program and mastermind. So if you are interested in going deeper on this topic, I invite you to consider booking a discovery call with us. We do offer a 30-minute free discovery call to help you identify your own places you may be out of alignment and really start to create a vision and some next action steps towards stepping into your fuller expression as a leader. We also have a quiz that we brought online this year called the 4 Keys quiz, and I will put some links to those things in the chat so that you have access if you would like to follow up by taking the quiz and getting to know more the aspects that may be out of alignment for you in this moment as a woman in leadership. All right, that all being said, I thank you very much for your time. I hope we get to see each other again soon. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. I'm Leanne Mallory, founder and CEO of Guts and Grace, and it has been a pleasure to be with you today. Take good care, and we'll see you again.